We often associate many countries with danger for a number of different reasons. Whether it's a history of war and conflict, a severe climate, high rates of crime, widespread political corruption, dangerous animals, or some other factor, it's likely you can think of a few stereotypically dangerous countries pretty easily. This can be harmful when we make generalizations about a region of the world, especially when thinking about levels of poverty and other forms of inequality experienced in developing countries. But understanding which countries are most dangerous and why they're so dangerous can be important not only for individuals looking for safe travel destinations, but also for world leaders who develop alliances and provide foreign aid to countries in need. So what makes a country dangerous, and which countries are the most dangerous in the world? We will explore these questions in this video. One of the most useful tools in determining the most dangerous countries in the world is the Global Peace Index. The Global Peace Index is the world's top, most comprehensive data-driven measure of global peacefulness, and is a report produced by the Institute for Economics and Peace. The index examines peace and the economic value of peace, as well as how to develop peaceful societies, and represents the peacefulness of 99.7% of the world's population. The Global Peace Index uses data from highly respected sources around 23 qualitative and quantitative factors to measure the state of peace in countries and regions around the world. The factors measured include topics from 3 domains: the level of societal safety and security, the extent of ongoing domestic and international conflict, and the degree of militarization. The Global Peace Index provides a glimpse of some of the world's most peaceful countries, including Iceland, Denmark, Ireland, New Zealand, and Australia, but it also indicates the countries with the lowest levels of peacefulness. The index considers many factors in determining how peaceful a country is: deaths from global conflicts, economic impacts of violence, military expenditures and sizes of militaries, levels of deterioration in a country, risk of terrorism, homicide rates, incarceration rates, and other factors. You might be wondering, where in the world is most dangerous? Without further ado, let's explore the top 10 most dangerous countries in the world. The 10th most dangerous country in the world is Iraq. You may know of Iraq because of the ongoing military conflicts that have been based in Iraq for much of the 21st century. Iraq has been in a nearly constant state of conflict for several decades, beginning with an 8-year-long war with Iran during the 1980s, followed by the first Gulf War in the 1990s, a 2003 invasion by the United States military, years of sectarian warfare, and conflict with Islamic State militant extremists. Iraq is rated as among the most dangerous countries on account of its high political terror and instability, as well as high levels of terrorist activity and conflict with neighboring states. Famously, the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham, also known as the extremist group called ISIS, has a strong foothold in Iraq and has rapidly become the most aggressive, ambitious, and deadly extremist movement on the planet. ISIS is a Salafi jihadist group that has led many terrorist attacks worldwide, which has caused thousands of casualties. The rapid expansion of ISIS greatly outpaced and eventually replaced Al-Qaeda, another infamous extremist group that preceded the formation of ISIS, demonstrating how great a threat to peace and safety ISIS is in Iraq and the Middle East. Though an international coalition had a territorial defeat over ISIS which ejected it from its stronghold in Syria in 2019, operations continue to happen in Syria and Iraq, and ISIS oversees at least 19 branches and networks in Africa, Asia, and Europe. ISIS is best known for its lack of regard for human life and basic rights. Beyond the presence of extremist groups like ISIS, Iraq is also known for its undisciplined militia and authoritarian government. The military has a rigid and intolerant ideology and overtook a US-trained and armed militia that cost billions of dollars to establish. Many of the trained soldiers fled, leaving hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians unprotected. Beyond that, leaders of Iraq have struggled to control the spread of ISIS and extremist perspectives, and the government has become a relatively authoritarian state. Throughout the 21st century, there have been many coordinated attacks specifically related to bombings, targeted killings, and improvised explosive devices. Oftentimes, these attacks are from suicide bombings organized by extremist groups and are a symptom of political dysfunction in Iraq. One main driver of violence in Iraq is around the political polarization between political leaders and their opponents, especially between the Shia and Sunni people. In the early 2010s, high-profile targeted killings began to increase, specifically those targeting high-level politicians and government officials. These killings often serve as warnings, threats, or attempts to take back political power or control of a given territory. While Iraq is politically very tense and at times dangerous, the country has a rich culture with many shared values that are held in high esteem, like generosity and humility. Many Iraqis are very religious and relatively conservative, but Iraq is home to considerable cultural diversity, known for its unique music, food, art, history, and literature, among other things. Despite its reputation as very politically dangerous, a small but growing number of tourists have been going to Iraq to see its ecological and historical attractions. Many of these tourists are from neighboring Arab Gulf countries, but also increasing numbers of European and American tourists have also been visiting the country despite travel advisories warning not to visit. Despite not much conflict, some people believe that Iraq is becoming a safe tourist destination. However, many American and other tourists have been killed or detained as part of terrorist actions or military conflict while in Iraq. Clearly, Iraq poses a real threat to safety in terms of its levels of military conflict and polarization, as well as on account of the extremist groups and terrorism based in the region. So while that might sound dangerous, it's the safest country on our list. Who can be more dangerous than Iraq? The ninth most dangerous country on the planet is Sudan. You might be familiar with the fact that Sudan is one of Africa's largest countries and that it has more pyramids than Egypt does. But you probably don't know much about why many governments worldwide recommend that their citizens avoid travel to this beautiful African country. So what's so dangerous about Sudan? Sudan is rated as ninth most dangerous because of the accessibility of weapons in the country, high rates of organized internal conflict, political instability, and terror, and high amounts of United Nations peacekeeping funding received in Sudan. Sudan is a country where security and safety is currently very volatile. Many governments have put out advisories indicating to their people that travel to Sudan is not recommended. Australia advised any citizens in Sudan in August 2023 that they should strongly consider leaving the country as soon as possible because violence can escalate at any moment. Tourists and foreigners in Sudan have been experiencing various attacks, including assaults, home invasions, and looting. And there's a serious risk of terrorism and kidnapping targeted at foreigners as well. The country also houses many landmines and unexploded remnants of prior wars. So, aside from main roads and paths labeled as having been demined, people in Sudan risk setting off old explosives. Like in Iraq, many of Sudan's threats to safety lie in long-standing political conflicts and state disintegration. Among these disputes are human rights violations, marginalization of minority groups, the concentration of power and wealth in Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, the growing political and economic powers of the army and paramilitary groups, and widespread poverty in the country. Sudan is known for covering a vast territory and for its ethnic and religious diversity. Since gaining its independence from Britain and Egypt in 1956, Sudan has experienced a long history of civil wars and power struggle between the political center in Khartoum and its southern and western peripheries. On top of this, for 3 decades between 1989 and 2019, Sudan's president Omar al-Bashir allied with radical Islamists to persecute non-Muslims and remote African tribes across Sudan. Beyond the considerable risk of threats to physical safety in Sudan, there are also many risks to health in the country. As of 2023, Sudan is experiencing an outbreak of cholera and vaccine-deprived poliovirus. Cholera can cause diarrhea, vomiting, and leg cramps, and these rapid loss of body fluids lead to dehydration and shock. Without adequate treatment, cholera can lead to death within hours. Also prevalent in Sudan are many insect-borne diseases, including yellow fever, malaria, Zika virus, and dengue. HIV and AIDS, which are passed through bodily fluids, and infectious diseases like hepatitis and typhoid. Sudan also is dangerous for people engaging in various activities on account of its strict adherence to Islamic Sharia law. Same-sex relations, extramarital sexual activity, and efforts to convert Muslims to Christianity are all illegal, as well as taking photographs of military installations, infrastructure, and in various places in Sudan. Despite being associated with danger, many see opportunities in Sudan for democratization and massive military reforms, with a lot of work to be done. With its rich history and beautiful sites including pyramids, the Kingdom of Kush, and biodiverse marine wildlife, Sudan is a place of natural beauty that many people can appreciate and is part of a major project to combat desertification and climate change. You could argue that Sudan is at the very least an environmentally safe place to be. But how dangerous is the next country on our list, located fairly close to Sudan? The 8th least peaceful country in the world is Somalia. You may know Somalia as Africa's easternmost country, located on what is called the Horn of Africa. Somalia is rated by the Global Peace Index as 8th most dangerous given the accessibility of weapons in Somalia and high rates of organized internal conflict and violent crime, as well as political terror and instability, terrorist activity, and high rates of displaced Somali people. Somalia is ranked as the second poorest country in the world following Burundi, with 70% of Somalis living in poverty and most Somali people depending on livestock and agriculture for income and food. However, because of many dry rain seasons, the country has been impacted by famine resulting from failed crops and dead livestock. In 2011, a famine killed as many as 250,000 people in Somalia, half of which were children. Somalia also experiences the impacts of extreme weather, violence, and disease, as well as climate change. Poor health and disease are also experienced by many Somalians. Somalia is considered to be one of the most unstable countries in the world, and some people go as far as saying that Somalia is governed by anarchy and endless chaos. Somalia has been host to an ongoing civil war since 1991, after the country's dictator, Siad Barre, was overthrown. Ever since, the extremist group Al-Shabaab has been in power ever since. The civil war has resulted in nearly 500,000 deaths over the past 3 decades, with 3,000 people dying every year in recent years. Somalia has been through suicide bombings, medieval-style stonings, white phosphorus bombs, beheadings, and heavily armored pirates hijacking vessels that pass through the adjacent Gulf of Aden. Somalia has been impacted by the whims of warlords, buccaneers, kidnappers, bombers, Islamic extremists, and freelance gunmen. Young people often can access guns, but do not have formal education. In some parts of Somalia, civilians are made to pay fees to armed militia or participate in hostilities. At the same time as all this violence, there's a simultaneous humanitarian crisis in Somalia related to both conflict and climate change, which has resulted in significant displacement of Somali people. By the year 2018, nearly 1 million Somalis had become displaced from their homes, with 300,000 fleeing from violence and attacks, and over 500,000 farmers and pastoralists displaced from climate disasters including flooding and drought. In 2019 alone, nearly 600,000 Somalis were displaced, which meant over 4 million Somalis were in need of humanitarian assistance. You may be surprised to learn that climate change is known to exacerbate conflict, as competition for fertile land, access to clean water and food, and other issues cause growing political tensions amidst already existing conflicts. In Somalia's pastoralist communities, conflict has been growing as a result of flooding and drought. Despite the mass immigration of Somalis to safer countries, many Somalis have fled to urban areas, and many people who previously immigrated to neighboring countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Yemen are returning. This may indicate improvements or hopes of re-establishing life in Somalia, but it may also indicate escalating conflicts in the countries where people fled to for protection. As you can see, Somalia is clearly a country plagued by conflict and climate-related impacts, which poses significant and possibly deadly risk to the people living there. Ukraine is among them, ranked as the 7th most dangerous country in the world presently. You might recognize Ukraine because of its occupation by Russia, which has captured attention around the world. The prominent reasons for Ukraine's 7th most dangerous ranking include political instability, high rates of organized conflict internally, and high rates of death from internal conflict, easily accessible weapons, poor relations with neighboring countries, currently Russia, and high rates of displaced people. In the areas of Ukraine occupied by Russia, the Ukrainian government has no jurisdiction, and in many places there are no government services available that are usually meant for public safety, including police officers, hospitals, firefighters, and ambulance services. Several countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, have all advised their citizens to avoid all travel to Ukraine as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The invasion caused many Ukrainian people to flee to neighboring and nearby countries like Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia. Ukraine has a high risk of pickpocketing, especially in tourist areas, bars, and nightclubs, and especially on public transit and scamming. There are also common muggings and armed robberies that especially take place in central Kyiv. Beyond these personal attacks, Ukrainian authorities have already disrupted a number of planned terrorist attacks in Ukraine, with terrorism also deemed a high risk. Given how unpredictable the status of Ukraine's safety from conflict, terrorism, and Russian influence can be, it's clear that people in Ukraine are experiencing uncertainty and real risk to life and safety under Russia's occupation. However, the future of Ukraine's safety remains to be seen. It may come as no surprise that the sixth least peaceful country in the world right now is Russia. When you think of Russia, you probably think of the country's recent unprovoked occupation of Ukraine, but you might also think of Russia's Soviet history and ongoing tensions between the United States and Russia in the Cold War, especially during the arms race. Russia comes in the sixth most dangerous spot on account of its high rates of weapons exports, deaths from international conflicts, and number of external conflicts engaged in. Russia is also ranked highly for conflict with neighboring countries and a number of nuclear and heavy weapons. Though Russia has a long history of involvement in war and conflict, as a major power during both World Wars and the Cold War, some political experts believe that the present moment is the maximum point of Russian danger we have experienced thus far. Russia has begun weaponizing global food exports, attacking Ukrainian ports and cities, and seems willing to strike infrastructure and civilians in their attacks. Seeing as Russia has ready access to nuclear weapons and is growing increasingly desperate as many world powers seek to counter the Russian occupation of Ukraine, the risk of an act of nuclear warfare is an accessible escalation that makes Russia a dangerous and unpredictable nation-state. Visiting Russia is discouraged in many travel advisories, which mainly cite the country's partial military mobilization in Ukraine, though pickpockets and terrorist threats also pose a significant risk for travelers. The United States has also advised its citizens that there's a potential for harassment and detention of U.S. citizens, and that the U.S. Embassy has a limited ability to help U.S. citizens who are in Russia. Famously, WNBA star Brittany Griner was recently held for 10 months in a Russian prison for possession of marijuana, and the United States had to arrange a prisoner exchange for her return. Russia is also known for being a very authoritarian state, with often corrupt officials and inconsistent protections for the right to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression, so people involved in political or social protests can be detained for speaking out against the Russian government. It seems Russia poses a real risk for not only people living in its country, but also for Ukraine and global powers worldwide, especially as it persists in its occupation of Ukraine. But still, there are 5 more countries ranked more dangerous than Russia. The world's 5th most dangerous country is the Democratic Republic of Congo. You might be familiar with the fact that the Congo is endowed with abundant natural resources, including minerals like cobalt and copper, arable land, the potential for hydroelectric power, rich biodiversity, and the 2nd largest rainforest in the world. The Congo is ranked as 5th most dangerous because of its high rates of internal conflict and violent crime, including homicide, as well as easy access to weapons. For decades, conflict in the east side of the country has prompted competing rebel factions to fight over control of diamond and mineral mines. One journalist with The Guardian has said that Congo is the world's most dangerous place for women, explaining that soldiers from the East Congo routinely terrorize communities and subjugate villages, attacking old women and young children alike. Women in Eastern Congo are also subjected to horrific physical violence. This approach to establishing political and social control clearly hurts the women living in East Congo and indicates how a culture that has a prevalent misogyny and gender-based violence harms Congolese women. At the same time, political instability in the Democratic Republic of Congo contributes to ongoing threats of terrorist attacks and frequent attacks on civilians and government officials alike. Large-scale protests also often take place unpredictably and end unexpectedly. Not only that, but there's a high rate of kidnapping and crime in Congo, often targeting foreigners. The country has an extreme rate of poverty and a prevalent climate of impunity, so violence and criminal activity is a high risk in the Congo. Despite the clear violence that is prevalent, especially in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, the unique biodiversity, wildlife, indigenous cultures, and geological wonders found in the Congo attract many tourists each year, despite the clear dangers that the country poses. Still, the violence and political instability of the Congo explains why it was ranked as 5th most dangerous in the world. Rated as the fourth most dangerous country in the world is South Sudan. You might be wondering, wait, there's such a thing as South Sudan? Unsurprisingly, South Sudan is located directly south of Sudan and is the world's newest country, gaining independence from Sudan in 2011. South Sudan is the fourth most dangerous country in the world because of its high rate of UN peacekeeping funding received, as well as the overwhelming displacement of South Sudan's people, high rates of homicides and violent crimes, considerable political instability and terror, and significant rates of organized internal conflict. South Sudan has one of the youngest populations in the world, with the median age of 14.8 years old. But it also has one of the lowest average life expectancies in the world, with 59.16 years as the average lifespan. As a reasonably new country, however, armed conflict is ongoing between various political and ethnic groups, and weapons are readily accessible to citizens. Further, cattle raids are common throughout South Sudan, which also often spark conflict between citizens. The United States has advised its citizens that foreign nationals in South Sudan have been subjugated to sexual assault, armed robberies, and other violent crimes, and that kidnappings, carjackings, shootings, and ambushes are also common in South Sudan. Journalists, in particular, face a considerable risk in South Sudan, as reporting without proper documentation is illegal, and any journalistic work is very dangerous. Many journalists have been harassed or even killed in South Sudan. It's clear that the dangers posed by South Sudan relate to the country's recent establishment and associated political and interpersonal conflicts. As such a young country, South Sudan has the potential to become a safer place to live and visit as it matures as a country and government, but we still have to wait and see. Syria is rated as the third most dangerous country in the world right now. You probably recognize the country Syria because of the massive onslaught of Syrian refugees who have been seeking asylum since as early as 2011. Syria is ranked as the third most dangerous given its high rate of homicide and readily accessible weapons, high rates of organized internal conflict and violent crime, considerable political terror and terrorist activity, tense relations with neighboring countries, and high rates of displaced people. Syria has been in a state of active armed conflict for over a decade, and all parts of the country are reportedly impacted by violence. Acts of violence include armed kidnappings, unjust arrests and detentions, chemical warfare, shelling, and aerial bombardment of civil centers, and pose a risk of serious injury or death to all impacted. Terrorism is also prevalent in Syria, and many parts of Syria have experienced bombings and assassinations, as ISIS and al-Qaeda affiliates have taken power. At the same time, Syrians have experienced the destruction of infrastructure, housing, medical facilities, schools, power and water utilities, and more, which all impact safety and well-being of Syrian people. The government has also actively suppressed protests and demonstrations through aggressive tactics. Many protesters and political dissenters are routinely detained without access to legal representation or communication with friends and family. Syria's government detention centers are notoriously unsanitary and inhumane. Cruel, disregarding torment of detainees have been recorded. This includes torture and extrajudicial killings. These Syrian detention centers have especially unjustly detained minors, disabled people, and older adults. As a result of all political instability and violence present in Syria, many Syrians have sought asylum elsewhere, with 6.8 million of the world's 53.2 million refugees coming from Syria. Not only is there political violence impacting Syrians, but Syria is also known to have a severe lack of medical care and education access, and water and food contaminated with infectious diseases like typhoid and hepatitis. Most commercial airlines do not travel to Syria, so refugees have challenges leaving the country. At present, it's clear that Syria is a dangerous country to live in, and the impacts of Syrians living in the country are subjected to severe living conditions. But unfortunately, things can get even more dangerous. The country ranked as second most dangerous on the globe right now is Yemen. You might have heard about how Yemen is known for its historic ruins from the Roman Empire, along old frankincense and myrrh trade routes. The reasons Yemen is ranked as second most dangerous include its considerable access to weapons, high rates of violent crime, political instability and terror, significant organized conflict internally and subsequent deaths, and high rates of displaced people originating from Yemen. Yemen has been in a civil war for 8 years, and this war has prompted the deaths of thousands of Yemeni people, and a major humanitarian crisis. When in 2011, Yemen forced its authoritarian president Ali Abdullah Saleh to hand over power. The new president, Abdrabbuh, was left to deal with major economic problems and security concerns related to jihadist attacks. At that time, the Houthis, Yemen's Zaidi Shia Muslim minority, seized control of Sada province of Yemen and the nation's capital in 2014 and 2015. In spite of the violence in Yemen, Yemenis are fairly hospitable people who strongly value community and familial relationships. Support and familial interdependence are very important to many Yemeni people. With such strong values within Yemeni communities, the fact that Yemen is so dangerous might seem surprising. Even so, Yemen is largely considered one of the most dangerous places on the planet. Much of the conflict in Yemen is related to control over territory and oil resources, as well as national military and political power. As fighting spread throughout the country, citizens have been forced to flee their homes, and 4.5 million people, one of every 7 Yemenis, has been displaced by Yemen's conflicts, and 24.1 million people, or 80% of the Yemeni population, need humanitarian aid and protection. At the same time, tens of thousands of Yemeni people are experiencing famine-like conditions, and 6 million more are on the brink of famine. Evidently, the impacts of Yemen's years of conflict include displacement, hunger, lack of healthcare, unsafe water, the deaths of more than 11,000 children, and major cholera outbreaks impacting a suspected 2.5 million people and killing 4,000. It's no question why Yemeni is toward the top of the list when it comes to the world's most dangerous countries, as the country faces a major humanitarian crisis impacting millions of people. And yet, despite everything we've heard, there's still one country that's more dangerous than all of the others. Finally, the most dangerous country in the world is Afghanistan. You probably recognize Afghanistan from the invasion led by the United States in 2001 to eliminate the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. This followed the September 11th attacks impacting New York City and Washington, D.C., caused by terrorist actions. Afghanistan takes the #1 spot in terms of most dangerous countries because of its readily accessible weapons, high rates of violent crime, political instability and terror, and deaths from internal conflict. Afghanistan also has a relatively high military expenditure and high rates of internal conflicts, as well as high rates of domestic and international conflict. The country is also ranked as having considerable numbers of displaced people and poor relations with other countries. The state of security in Afghanistan is extremely volatile, with ongoing and significant threats of terrorism throughout the country, including the airport and religious sites. United Kingdom travel advisories warn citizens that there's a heightened risk of British nationals being detained without notifying the British government, and these detentions may be lengthy. The Taliban, an extremist group in Afghanistan, took full control of Afghanistan in 2021. The country's new rulers perpetrate numerous human rights abuses, which are evident in the famine, worsening sanitation, collapsing healthcare system, and considerable violence experienced by people living in Afghanistan. Under the Taliban's control, the government of Afghanistan is authoritarian and oppressive, and the country is plagued by terrorism and political violence. Terrorist attacks often are deadly and claim many civilian lives and infrastructure. As a result, the risk of kidnapping, violent crime, gender-based violence, harassment, and armed conflict are very high for everyone in Afghanistan, especially foreign nationals. Given the unstable security in Afghanistan, criminals often take advantage of the country's condition to violently attack travelers. Those at the most risk include foreigners, human rights advocates, journalists, judges and prosecutors, religious scholars, healthcare workers, and even civilians. Sometimes forced marriage can impact foreign nationals visiting Afghanistan, occasionally without knowledge or consent. Some criminals will also use explosive devices and firing rockets, as well as armed assaults and ambushes to kidnap or harm people in Afghanistan. Throughout the countryside, Afghanistan has millions of landmines, which also pose a severe threat to safety. Beyond all this, the widespread poverty, political turmoil, all threaten the well-being of those in Afghanistan. It makes sense that as a country that is so politically unstable and so impacted by violence, Afghanistan rounds out our list as the most dangerous country in the world. As you can see, our world is full of countries that pose danger to the people who live in and visit them. However, all of the threats to safety in a given country look different depending on the social, political, and economic contexts of a country. Some countries are threatened by invasion, while others are invading other countries. Some countries are plagued by famine and poverty, and others are facing terrorist violence and civil war. Violence and danger can look different in different parts of the world, but one thing remains the same. Millions of civilians worldwide are impacted, hurt, and displaced by the dangers discussed today.